The Sumerian and the Babylonian Akkadian texts were altered many times in the ancient past, as we discussed in previous papers, and so were the Vedas, until the alien invaders felt more at ease with what they released to the public. Some people think that the oldest Sumerian or Vedic records, for example, which they have found deeply buried and perhaps untouched for thousands of years, must be legitimate, telling the true story. What people are not thinking about, though, is that the records were manipulated in the first place in many cases, so it doesn't matter how old they are. The deity of Aldebaran is Brahma, who since the invasion of Earth is also known as Lord Vishnu, Lord Enki. The way I see it is that after Lucifer's rebellion and Lucifer being cast out of heaven, he took his resort to Aldebaran and the Pleiades, a sanctuary he soon also came to share with his future consort, Queen Ereshkigal. The Taurus/Bull constellation is depicted in the night sky as facing Orion in combat, which is Lucifer's future goal. The invasion will come from the Pleiades as well as the invasion came from the Pleiades. Having listened to the Pleiadian lectures over the years is paying off. There are things I wouldn't have been able to put together if I hadn't listened to them and read Barbara Marciniak's channeled books. In a lecture that now is a few years old, the Pleiadians said that their ancestors were the branch of the fallen angels that descended to Mount Hermon, led by the dark angel, Azazel. They were the giants who came and raped human women and created giant offspring, the Nephilim. What the Pleiadians never said is that these giants from the Pleiades were no different from the original invaders team. The invasion came from the Pleiades because that's where Lucifer resided at the time when he decided to invade Earth. Azazel and his team are in no shape and form differentiated from the rest of the alien force. It's just that at one point in time, some of the alien minions decided, or were ordered to, create a new life form on Earth, the giants. It was an experiment like everything else. As a side note, they also got the pleasure of seducing human females, whom they found irresistibly attractive. Hypothetically, these beings could, in their interdimensional form, have sex with human females, especially in dream state, but that's not what they wanted. They wanted to experience sex the way humans experienced sex. How did they do that? By taking on human male bodies, of course. That's how they did it, and that didn't create any giant Nephilim. How could it? No, the Nephilim were created in laboratories, possibly on Mars. Still, the issue is, the alien invasion, which forced the Orion settlers here on Earth to retreat back to Orion, came from the Pleiades. Now, if we look at the constellations again, with Taurus facing Orion, this has two significances. First, it symbolizes this ancient battle between the Pleiades and Orion here in our solar system, but it also symbolizes a future threat from the Pleiades, saying, the day will come when we will invade Orion and take over Satania, Orion's inner sanctuary, and the sky will show everybody that we mean business. The bull has already horned Orion once in the War of the Titans, and in the night sky, we see him on his way to horn him again. Another interesting thing here is something else I learned from the Pleiadians. I have brought it up before, but not in this exact context. The Pleiadians say that we humans will have a great part in the future war between the Pleiades and Orion. As I mentioned earlier in this paper, the entire Pleiades, or Taurus constellation, is not yet under Lucifer's control. In the future, however, it seems as if Lucifer wants the entire constellation to be his to rule, possibly because it will be a strong and strategic military unification in a future war. Here on Earth, we have already started planning for all this with our research in artificial intelligence, AI, super soldiers, cyborgs, cloning, and singularity, etc. On the timeline where this will be brought to fruition, humanity as a social memory complex, SMC, will be the foot soldiers who attack the Pleiades that are not yet under Lucifer's control. This independent part of the Pleiades will fight back, and a terrific civil war will break out in the Pleiades. The future humans, a faction of which we call the Grey Aliens, will fight ferociously and without fear because our emotions will be controlled by proxy, possibly from a location on Saturn. According to the Pleiadians themselves, this is what is happening in the Pleiades as they speak. They try to convince us that Enki is amongst the rebel group who wants independence in the Pleiades, and he wants mankind to evolve naturally, without technology, while Enlil is the bad guy, who has instigated the process leading to the civil war in the Pleiades. The Pleiadians are thereby saying that they are working with Enki to help us humans here in our time, the 21st century, to choose a more peaceful timeline without AI, cloning, and all the rest of it. That way, hopefully, the violent timeline that led to the war in the Pleiades will be erased and at the same time save the beings in the Pleiades from our ferocious selves, armed to our teeth with Enlil's deadly weapons. Not even with the most objectivity one can imagine would the above agenda make sense. The evidence against it is, as they say, overwhelming. However, the reader can clearly see how we are being deceived from many different angles at once, and it's certainly a great task to keep our minds straight in all this. The bottom line is, however, that the alien invader force, once again from the constellation of Taurus, want to attack Orion, but this time with a much greater force, where we humans are a part of the agenda. It's evident that Lucifer Enki at one point retreated to the Pleiades, and better yet, Aldebaran. With this in mind, suddenly evidence in other aspects of the larger scheme of things start emerging. One example is the consistent myth that Enlil was Jehovah. This can now be totally debunked by just picking evidence left and right. I picked the following because it comes from a neutral source, without any agenda in the Jehovah case. Quote 3. The bull has been associated with the animal that Adam first offered in sacrifice, or with the later victims in the Jewish temple, and the Christian school of which Novidius was spokesman recognized in Taurus the ox that stood with the ass by the manger at the Blessed Nativity. The bull goes way back in mythology and tradition, obviously, and was the first animal Adam supposedly offered to God. Why a bull? Because it was the animal most closely connected with God, known as Lucifer. As we can see, Aldebaran and the whole Taurus constellation, plus the Pleiades in specific, have a very important part in the past, present, and future of our sector of the galaxy, including our own solar system to a large degree. However, this is just the tip of the iceberg. There is more, a lot more. The Pleiades have a great deal of importance in today's New Age movement, as I think most of us have seen. However, in that sense, this asterism has taken on a relatively benevolent role. Not so much so by the New Agers themselves, but through manipulation that has hit the target from many different angles. Many say that the New Age movement actually started with Madame Helena Blavatsky and her channeling of the Ascended Masters, which with time developed into the so-called Ashtar Command. Out of Blavatsky's teachings came the Theosophical Society, a highly Luciferian movement. We are going to discuss this movement quite extensively in this paper because it's highly relevant in today's politics. Ashtar is said to originate in Sirius, but it also has tentacles that are reaching out toward Arcturus and the Pleiades, and they are usually portraying themselves as the attractive tall and blonde Nordics. We discussed the Ashtar Command to some extent in the third level of learning. Blavatsky and her successors, Alice Bailey and Anne Besant, also wrote and talked about the Egyptian goddess, Isis. Blavatsky even wrote a book called Isis Revealed. We don't need to look very far before we can see that there is a connection between Ashtar, Isis, Sirius, and the Pleiades. In previous papers, I have emphasized the importance of sound in this third dimension. How words are pronounced and the similarity between many of them when they are spoken can be of great importance. Ian is deeply embedded into our DNA. In what we just discussed, we have a few different names that are connected by the sound of them: Ashtar, Ishtar, Astarte, Atar, Astar, and Ast. Now, let us distinguish and then connect. Astarte is simply the Greek name of the Babylonian goddess Ishtar, and so is Atar and Ashtar. The word As means female of throne, or queen of the throne, and refers to Isis, who is the heiress of the throne of the Orion Empire. Thus, we can see that all these names and words are associated with the same being, Ishtar Isis. The Ashtar Command can now easily, by sound, be interchangeable with the Ishtar command, and we can get a good hint where this channeling comes from. If the Ashtar command is telling us that they come as our saviors, or are our beneficiaries, and we feel we can relate to that, we are indeed deceiving ourselves and are in deep trouble, obviously so, from what we have learned in the Westpenner papers. The Ashtar command goes back to a channeler called George Van Tassel, who claimed to be channeling this group of beings in the early 1950s. Since then, many channelers claim to have had contact with this galactic group of ETs or spiritual entities. They have often predicted end-of-the-world scenarios with themselves being the saviors of mankind. The origin of these beings differs depending on whom you are talking to. But there are many who say they have been told by the Ashtar command that they reside in one of the Pleiadian star systems. Although Marcinyak's Pleiadians do not want to discuss the Ashtar command and don't believe in saviors whatsoever, these beings are still promoting themselves as benevolent toward mankind and are said to be working with Enki. Thereby, we can sense a good cop, bad cop situation here, confusing the masses and putting the ETs in two camps, good and bad Pleiadians. Psychological warfare like this is a must in mind control, and it's not absent here, either. Here we have the mission of the Ashtar command, also called the Galactic Federation of Light. Quote number 4. The Ashtar command is the airborne division of the Great Brother/Sisterhood of Light, under the administrative direction of Commander Ashtar and the spiritual guidance of Lord Sananda, our Commander-in-Chief, known to Earth as Jesus the Christ. Composed of millions of starships and personnel from many civilizations, we are here to assist Earth and humanity through the current cycle of planetary cleansing and polar realignment. We serve like midwives in the birthing of humanity from dense physical to physical etheric bodies of light, capable of ascending into the fifth dimension along with the Earth. We of the Brotherhood of Light, and we who serve in the intergalactic fleets and cosmic federation councils, come forth to bring you knowledge for a most eventful and confusing transition. The readers probably have noticed that what we're now discussing is to some degree a recap of the third level of learning, but it's very important and worth repeating. Repetition is also something that is bound to happen when the things we are discussing are beginning to come full circle. Marcinyak's Pleiadians, from now on called the MP, boldly state that the Galactic Federation of Light is disinformation, but does this mean that the Ashtar command and the Federation don't exist? Not necessarily. They exist but are not what they say that they are. Ashtar and Ishtar are two names that are too similar to be ignored. The invaders work extensively with sound. This means that Ereshkigal, herself a Pleiadian resident who took over Ishtar's/Inanna's and Isis's role, is most probably in charge of the Galactic Federation of Light and the Ashtar command. To add to the confusion, we have the MP who reject the Ashtar command and any Galactic Federation, but when we study Ashtar, these websites often promote the MP, so it's making it very confusing and putting people in different camps, which is also the intention. It's actually brilliant because as long as people are in different camps, nothing earth-shaking will happen, and time is just running. 10 years later, such movements haven't moved an inch. It's all by design.